The story of history's most influential assassinations is, in essence, a story about the strange and precarious balance that holds human societies together. Civilizations rise on systems of power, authority, and collective beliefs. They topple when those systems are disrupted. And few disruptions shake political structures more violently than the unexpected removal of a central figure. At times, an assassination barely changes the trajectory of events. At other times, it ignites forces far greater than the individual who pulled the trigger or wielded the blade. What follows is a long and winding exploration of those moments in which a single violent act altered the course of nations, redirected the flow of wars, or reshaped entire eras. These stories are not about glorifying violence, but about understanding the immense, often tragic consequences that have followed from these actions. To begin this journey, it's necessary to understand the nature of political violence itself. In almost every era, there have been people who believed that removing one powerful individual would solve a crisis or prevent a looming catastrophe. Others saw assassination as the only way to strike back against tyranny. Still others acted out of desperation, fanaticism, fear, or misguided idealism. But the thread connecting all these acts is the belief that eliminating a single person would produce results far greater than what any conventional method could achieve. And, for better or worse, history often proves that belief correct. The impact of an assassination reverberates through time. It triggers war, revolution, collapse, or unexpected unity. It inspires copycats. It reshapes political ideologies. It becomes a symbol invoked for decades or centuries afterward. Long before the modern world, ancient societies experienced the destabilizing shock of political killings. In the Roman Republic, assassination became a grim feature of political life. Leaders who rose to prominence often carried the knowledge that they might not live long enough to enjoy their triumphs. No figure represents this better than Julius Caesar, whose life and death would influence the structure of governments for thousands of years. The senators who conspired against him believed they were saving the Republic. Instead, their act opened the gates to civil war and ushered in the imperial age. Caesar's death demonstrated with brutal clarity that removing one man cannot restore an idealized past when an entire system has already begun to fracture. But the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, more than any other event, reveals the explosive potential of political murder. This is where our deeper exploration begins, not with the man himself, nor even with the assassin, Gavrilo Princip, but with the world in which their lives intersected. For many people today, Ferdinand is remembered mainly as a catalyst, a figure whose death sparked the First World War. Yet he was more than a symbolic domino. He was the heir to one of Europe's most powerful thrones, and his position placed him at the center of political tensions brewing for decades. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was a sprawling, uneasy alliance of multiple ethnic groups, languages, and political factions. It stretched across much of Central and Eastern Europe, held together by tradition, monarchy, and administrative force rather than deep unity. Nationalist sentiment surged among the empire's Slavic populations, particularly in the region of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The empire had annexed Bosnia in 1908, intensifying resentment among Serbian nationalists who saw the territory as part of a future Slavic state. This resentment was not a quiet or passive force. It burned beneath the surface of every political debate, every border dispute, every rumor of war. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, though not widely beloved, held his own vision for the empire's future. He believed that the empire needed internal reform to survive the pressures of nationalism. His idea was to reorganize Austria-Hungary into a federation of semi-autonomous states, giving ethnic groups more political power. Ironically, this plan might have eased tensions with the South Slavs, but conspiracy and suspicion often override practical solutions. Many Serbian nationalists saw him not as a potential reformer, but as a threat. If his reforms strengthened the empire, the dream of independence would drift further out of reach. And so, groups like the Black Hand, a secretive nationalist organization with elements inside the Serbian government, viewed his visit to Sarajevo as an opportunity to strike a symbolic blow. It was into this world that Gavrilo Princip stepped. He was not a military general or a high-ranking political figure. He was a young man of 19, thin, sickly, and consumed by nationalist ideals. Like many young people swept up in the movements of the early 20th century, Princip believed that violence could awaken the world to injustice. He believed that removing one representative of imperial oppression would shake the foundations of the system he opposed. He certainly did not foresee the global chain reaction that would follow his action. Few assassins ever do. As Ferdinand's motorcade wound its way through Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, the atmosphere was anxious. Several conspirators lined the route. Earlier in the day, one of them had thrown a bomb at the Archduke's car, injuring officers in the vehicle behind him. Ferdinand insisted on visiting the hospital to check on the wounded men. This decision, though compassionate, placed him back on the same dangerous streets. And then came one of history's most improbable coincidences. The driver took a wrong turn. When he stopped to reverse the car, Princip found himself suddenly and unexpectedly within a few feet of his target. The shots he fired ended the lives of Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. But they also shattered the fragile structure of European diplomacy. Princip was quickly apprehended, and he did not resist. The news reached Vienna almost immediately. Within days, the Austro-Hungarian government implicated Serbia, issuing an ultimatum meant to provoke war. Russia mobilized to defend Serbia. Germany joined Austria-Hungary. France and Britain were soon drawn in. What followed was not simply a conflict between nations, but a total war that consumed global empires, toppled monarchies, reshaped borders, and introduced horrors the world had never seen. And so the assassination of a single man in a provincial city many Europeans could barely locate on a map set fire to the continent. It was not because Ferdinand was uniquely powerful or beloved, but because the political conditions around him were dry tinder. All it took was a spark. This is the essence of influential assassination. The act itself is often small, almost mundane in its physical execution, but the consequences spiral outward with uncontrollable force. Yet it would be a mistake to focus only on Princip's role without understanding the broader concept of assassination as a political tool. Throughout history, people who believed themselves marginalized, oppressed, or ignored turned to violence because they saw no other path. Whether justified or not, these individuals viewed assassination as a way to seize the world's attention. In many cases, it worked, but attention is not the same as victory. Princip's action, for instance, did not create an independent South Slav state through his own efforts. Instead, millions died in a war he never intended to start. The figure of the lone assassin is both dramatic and misleading. Assassinations rarely emerge from isolation. Even when one person ultimately carries out the attack, there are networks of ideology, discontent, or conspiracy behind them. These networks give the act its historical weight. When a ruler is removed because a foreign power wants to destabilize a region, or because insurgents want to incite revolution, or because a political faction wants to prevent reform, the assassin becomes the visible tip of a much larger iceberg. This is why the study of historical assassinations is really a study of political climate, social tension, and the psychology of belief. As we continue through these chapters, we will encounter figures who acted alone and figures backed by entire organizations. We will see assassinations that ended eras and others that inadvertently strengthened the very regimes they sought to destroy. We will examine cases where the assassin was hailed as a hero by some and condemned as a villain by others. And we will trace the unexpected threads that link these events together, revealing how political violence echoes across borders and centuries. But before moving deeper into those stories, it is useful to reflect on why certain assassinations become historically influential while others fade quickly from collective memory. The death of one leader may barely ripple across society, while the death of another becomes a watershed moment. The difference lies not in the identity of the victim alone, but in the context, the fragility of the political system, the rising tensions of the era, the ambitions of nearby powers, and the symbolic meaning attached to the act. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's death mattered not because of who he was, but because his empire was already teetering, alliances were already hardened, and Europe was ready, though not willing, to plunge into conflict. What we learn from examining these moments is that history is shaped not only by great forces, but by small decisions, accidents, and individual actions. The wrong turn taken by Ferdinand's driver, the chance presence of Princip at that precise moment. The political calculations made by leaders in Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. All these elements converge to unleash the First World War. And in that sense, the story of influential assassinations is also a story of human fallibility. This chapter serves as the gateway to a wider exploration of the assassinations that shaped our world. In the chapters to come, we will examine political murders that toppled empires, prevented peace, ignited revolutions, or altered global ideologies. From ancient Rome to modern states, from religious leaders to radical activists, these events form a tapestry of history's most consequential moments in which the death of one person changed the destiny of millions. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand is often remembered as the most consequential political killing in modern history, but it was far from the only moment in which the removal of a single figure shifted the trajectory of nations. To understand why these moments matter so deeply, it is necessary to move backward and forward through time, examining how assassinations have repeatedly acted as catalysts of transformation, sometimes hastening inevitable change, and at other times creating ruptures that would never have occurred otherwise. In many periods, the political order seemed strong, even unshakable, until a violent blow exposed its underlying fragility. And in other periods, it was already cracking, waiting only for a final shock to bring it down. Assassinations tend to occur when pressure within a society reaches a boiling point, and the act itself becomes a release valve, or in some cases, an explosion. One of the earliest and most famous examples of such an event is the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE. Every schoolchild knows the dramatic scene in which senators surrounded him, drawing their blades and striking him down at the foot of Pompey's statue. But behind the theatricality lies a deeper truth about how societies react when a leader is removed by force. Caesar was a powerful figure, but he was also a symptom of the political decay of the Roman Republic. By the time he crossed the Rubicon, the Republic had already experienced generations of internal conflict, corruption, and power struggles. Some senators believed that killing Caesar would restore the old balance. They imagined Rome returning to a time when institutions worked, when political norms were respected, and when no single individual dominated the state. Yet the assassination did not revitalize the Republic. Instead, it accelerated its collapse. Caesar's supporters rose in anger, his enemies were divided by fear and uncertainty, and within a few years, the Roman Empire emerged from the ruins of the old system. This pattern appears again and again in history. Assassins often claim to be saving their nation from tyranny, corrupt leadership, or dangerous policies. They believe that by eliminating one person, they can reset the system, but rarely does that occur. Political systems are too complex, with too many moving parts, and the assassination becomes less an act of correction and more a spark that ignites pent-up forces. Caesar's death unleashed a series of civil wars. And centuries later, his name became synonymous with imperial rule, precisely the opposite outcome his killers sought to prevent. Moving forward in time, a similarly significant assassination took place in 1588, though in a very different context. Japan, after a century of internal strife, was slowly heading toward unification under a succession of powerful warlords. Oda Nobunaga had begun the process, implementing sweeping reforms and crushing rival clans. But before he could complete his vision, he was betrayed and forced to take his own life after an attack by one of his own generals. Nobunaga's death plunged Japan into renewed uncertainty, and the power vacuum that followed led to the rise of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Hideyoshi eventually continued the unification efforts, but the assassination dramatically altered the course of Japanese political evolution. Instead of a smooth transition, Japan's unification became a patchwork of struggles, alliances, and shifting loyalties. The outcome might eventually have been similar, but the assassination guaranteed a more turbulent path. Assassinations rarely remain confined to the moment of violence itself. They reverberate outward, reshaping politics, inspiring imitators, and emboldening movements. This is evident in the case of Tsar Alexander Roman II of Russia, assassinated in 1881. Alexander Roman II was a reformer in many respects. He emancipated the serfs, modernized aspects of the Russian legal system, and took steps toward limited governmental reforms. Yet revolutionary groups believed that these efforts were insufficient, and they saw him as a symbol of autocratic oppression. The group known as the Peoples carried out a series of attempts to kill him before finally succeeding with a bomb attack in St. Petersburg. The irony is striking. They murdered the very Tsar who had done more to modernize Russia than any of his predecessors. The immediate effect of the assassination was not liberation or reform, but repression. His successor, Alexander Roman III, rolled back many of the reforms and imposed stricter authoritarian controls. Thus, the assassination pushed Russia further from the democratic future its perpetrators imagined. But the long-term consequences were even more profound. Revolutionary movements became more radical, culminating decades later in the Bolshevik Revolution. In a sense, Alexander Roman II assassination helped shape the climate of revolutionary violence that eventually overthrew the Romanov dynasty entirely. Like a stone thrown into a lake, the ripples widened over time. When we look at influential assassinations across history, we often find these ironies. Acts meant to bring justice bringing chaos instead, and acts meant to prevent conflict actually sparking larger wars. But there are also cases where the removal of a leader completely altered the direction of an empire. One such example occurred in the Mughal Empire in India. In 1707, Emperor Aurangzeb died of natural causes, but his death triggered a long period of instability. Earlier in the empire's history, however, assassinations had shaped the succession among princes vying for power. The Mughal administrative structure, like many pre-modern empires, lacked a stable method for ensuring smooth transitions. This instability created an environment in which political murders could drastically shift the balance of power. Yet assassinations did not only affect empires with dynastic struggles. In the modern world, the death of even a democratically elected leader can create seismic shockwaves. Consider the assassination of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln in 1865. The American Civil War had just ended, and the country stood at a fragile crossroads. Lincoln's vision for Reconstruction emphasized reconciliation and measured reintegration of the Southern states. His assassin, John Wilkes Booth, believed he was striking a blow for the Confederacy. In reality, the assassination destroyed any hope of a gentle reconstruction. The political atmosphere hardened, Northern anger intensified, and Congress enacted far harsher measures than Lincoln had intended. The consequences for the South, for African Americans, and for American politics stretched over generations. A single bullet shifted the moral and political character of an entire era. This demonstrates another key pattern. Assassinations often empower the most extreme voices by removing moderating influences. A leader who seeks compromise becomes a target precisely because extremists fear the middle ground. By killing the figure who bridges factions, the assassin strengthens division. This was true for Lincoln, and it would later be true for other political figures around the world. Long before these modern events, assassination was also used as a tool of foreign manipulation. During the medieval and early modern periods, rival kingdoms and empires sometimes hired assassins to eliminate leaders in neighboring territories. While not as commonly documented as domestic political murders, these operations could be extremely influential. Removing a rival king or destabilizing a border region through targeted violence could change the outcome of wars, halt economic expansion, or prevent diplomatic alliances. One of the most feared groups associated with assassination was the Nizari Ismaili sect in the Middle East during the Middle Ages, known in the West as the Assassins. They perfected the art of political murder, using stealth, infiltration, and ideological conviction to eliminate leaders they viewed as threats. European crusaders and Middle Eastern rulers alike lived in fear of their methods, but despite their ominous reputation, their aims were usually strategic. They targeted specific political figures to shape regional power. Their killings rarely altered global history in the way that the death of Franz Ferdinand or Julius Caesar did, but they demonstrated how a disciplined organization could wield assassination as a weapon of statecraft. To understand why some assassinations change the world while others fade into obscurity, we must consider the political structures in place at the time. A strong and stable system can absorb the shock of losing a leader. A fragile system cannot. When Caesar fell, Rome was already fractured. When Ferdinand was killed, Europe was already on edge. When Alexander Roman II died, Russia was already simmering with revolutionary tensions. The assassination becomes the match thrown onto dry grass. If the grass is damp, the match fizzles out. If the grass is dry, the entire field ignites. As we continue exploring significant assassinations, we must also examine how individuals like Gavrilo Princip understood their actions. Princip saw himself as part of a nationalist movement. He believed history would validate his attack. Many assassins, successful or not, think in these terms. They imagine themselves as actors in a grand narrative, not criminals but catalysts. They write manifestos, leave behind political statements, and see their violence as a necessary step toward a better world. Some view themselves as soldiers in a war, others as martyrs for a cause. But history has a complicated relationship with these individuals. Some are later celebrated by the nations they sought to free. Others are condemned universally. And in many cases, the outcome of their actions bears little resemblance to the world they hope to create. Another striking example appears in the life and death of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi was not a ruler, not an emperor, not a general. He held no formal political office, yet he was one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. His assassination in 1948, carried out by a Hindu nationalist who opposed Gandhi's views on religious unity, did not plunge India into war, but it did change the moral direction of the country. Gandhi had been a powerful advocate for peace between Hindus and Muslims in the aftermath of partition. His death removed a stabilizing influence at a time when the wounds of violence and displacement were still raw. While India survived the shock and continued to move forward, the assassination left a permanent mark on national identity. It symbolized the cost of division and the dangers of extremism within a diverse society. Assassinations can also backfire by strengthening the very forces the killers opposed. In the case of Gandhi, his death elevated him from a political leader to a global symbol of nonviolence and unity. Similarly, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, though devastating to the civil rights movement, also intensified national awareness and legislative urgency. Acts of violence sometimes produce waves of sympathy that accelerate the progress of the very movements the attackers sought to destroy. But even in these cases, the human cost is enormous. A leader removed from history leaves behind a void that is never fully filled. In the larger story of political killings, the motivations behind assassination are as varied as the consequences. Some killers act out of ideological conviction. Others are motivated by personal hatred, religious zeal, or desperation. Some are manipulated by larger organizations. Some operate with meticulous planning, while others act spontaneously. What unites them is the belief, accurate or not, that the world will be different after their action. And they are right. The world always changes. The question is how. The political, social, and cultural impacts of assassination stretch far beyond the individuals involved. They shape wars, influence borders, and redirect the course of diplomacy. They shift public opinion, inspire political reforms, or provoke repressive crackdowns. They can accelerate the decline of empires or harden the resolve of nations. They can introduce chaos or create unity, and sometimes they completely redefine how nations understand themselves. As we move deeper into this exploration, each chapter will examine assassinations not merely as isolated acts, but as turning points in the narrative of human history. These events illuminate the delicate structures that govern societies and remind us that history is rarely shaped only by grand speeches, sweeping reforms, or monumental battles. Sometimes it is shaped by a single moment of violence, carried out by a single individual who believes that history itself hinges on the pull of a trigger or the thrust of a blade. In examining history's most influential assassinations, we move now into a period defined by nation-states, competing ideologies, expanding empires, and the emergence of mass politics. Unlike the empires of antiquity, modern political systems often rely on public legitimacy, mass mobilization, and national identity. As a result, the assassination of even a single figure can drastically alter how populations perceive their own history and future. The 19th and early 20th centuries, in particular, form an era in which assassinations dramatically reshaped political landscapes. Technological advancement made weapons easier to acquire. Cities concentrated political leaders and symbolic targets. New ideologies circulated rapidly, inspiring both hope and extremism. And the press spread news instantly, amplifying the psychological shock of each attack. In this context, assassinations did not simply remove individuals. They destabilized governments, accelerated revolutions, and created crises that reverberated around the world. One of the most striking examples of this period is the assassination of U.S. President James A. Garfield in 1881. Garfield was only a few months into his term when he was shot by Charles Guiteau, a man who believed he was owed a political appointment and convinced himself that killing the president would somehow unify the Republican Party. Guiteau was mentally unstable, but his act revealed the deep political dysfunction of the era. The United States, still healing from the wounds of the Civil War, was mired in the corrupt patronage system known as the spoils system. Garfield's death directly triggered sweeping civil service reforms that transformed American government. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, passed in 1883, began dismantling patronage by requiring government jobs to be awarded based on merit rather than political loyalty. Thus, the assassination achieved something neither Guiteau nor Garfield intended: the modernization of the American bureaucracy. It serves as a reminder that the consequences of a political killing may produce reforms that are long overdue, but arise from tragedy rather than reason. Another enormously consequential assassination of this era occurred in 1901, when U.S. President William McKinley was killed by anarchist Leon Czolgosz. Unlike Guiteau, Czolgosz acted with clear ideological intent. He believed the state itself was the root of social injustice, and that removing a head of state would strike a blow against oppression. His attack took place in Buffalo, New York, during a public reception. McKinley's death propelled his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt, into office at the age of 42, making him the youngest president in American history. Roosevelt's rise shifted the direction of the United States sharply. Within years, he expanded federal regulatory power, aggressively pursued antitrust actions, initiated major conservation efforts, and dramatically expanded American influence on the world stage. One could argue that without McKinley's assassination, Roosevelt might never have become president so early, if at all, and the progressive era of American politics would have taken a very different shape. This illustrates how assassinations sometimes accelerate the rise of leaders who fundamentally alter their nation's trajectory. Yet the United States was far from the only nation transformed by political killings. Europe, too, saw a wave of assassinations that exposed the vulnerability of monarchies and nascent democracies. In 1894, French President Sadi Carnot was stabbed by an Italian anarchist seeking revenge for the execution of another anarchist. The act symbolized the rising tensions between governments and revolutionary movements. France, already marked by internal strife during the Third Republic, saw this as confirmation of the threat posed by political extremism. While Carnot's death did not change the structure of France in the way Lincoln's or McKinley's had changed America, it deepened the fear of radical ideologies and influenced French domestic policy for years. 2 decades later, in 1911, the assassination of Russian Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin demonstrated how removing a single reformer can shape the fate of an entire empire. Stolypin was attempting to restructure Russian agriculture and modernize the political system. He was one of the few figures capable of balancing reform with stability. His assassination by Dmitry Bogrov, a revolutionary with complex ties to the secret police, eliminated the last major figure who might have guided Russia toward peaceful modernization. Without Stolypin's leadership, the imperial government drifted into deeper dysfunction. Only 6 years later, the Romanov dynasty collapsed entirely during the Russian Revolution. Although Stolypin's death was not the sole cause of Russia's downfall, it removed a critical stabilizing force, accelerating the collapse of the empire. Assassinations were not limited to heads of state or prime ministers. They also targeted reformers, thinkers, and activists whose influence posed a threat to entrenched systems. The murder of Empress Elizabeth of Austria in 1898 shocked Europe, not only because she was royalty, but because the act appeared so senseless. Her assassin, an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, killed her simply because he wanted to strike a blow against monarchy in general. There was no personal grievance, no political strategy beyond symbolic violence. The randomness of her death underscored the growing fear that modern society had enabled new forms of unpredictable extremism. Monarchs and political leaders alike faced unprecedented vulnerability, not because they were poor rulers, but because political violence had become democratized. Anyone with a knife or a gun could alter history. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were also marked by assassinations that influenced independence movements and colonial policies. In British-controlled Ireland, political violence became a recurring theme in the struggle for self-determination. One particularly influential event was the assassination of Sir Henry Wilson in 1922, a British military figure and advisor whose ties to Northern Ireland's government made him a target for the Irish Republican Army. His murder intensified political pressure on the Irish treaty negotiations already underway. Though not the sole catalyst, it contributed to the outbreak of the Irish Civil War, which determined the political shape of Ireland for decades. This assassination illustrates how killing a symbolic representative of power can accelerate political divides that would otherwise unfold more slowly. But among all the assassinations of this era, few had consequences as far-reaching as the killing of Austrian Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss in 1934. Dollfuss ruled Austria during a time of rising fascism and deep political polarization. He dissolved parliament, banned the Austrian Nazi Party, and aligned closely with Italy's Benito Mussolini. His assassination by Austrian Nazis during a failed coup attempt nearly succeeded in bringing Austria under German control 4 years before the Anschluss. Though the coup was suppressed, the assassination intensified internal instability and made Austria more vulnerable to external pressure. The crime revealed how extremist groups used targeted political killings to destabilize governments, paving the way for larger geopolitical shifts. In this case, the removal of Dollfuss foreshadowed the eventual annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany, an event that would play a critical role in the unfolding of World War II. Throughout this period, assassination became intertwined with ideological movements, particularly anarchism, nationalism, and socialism. The wave of anarchist assassinations around the turn of the century reflected a broader dissatisfaction with industrial capitalism, oppressive labor conditions, and unequal political representation. Anarchists believed that striking at symbols of authority, presidents, monarchs, industrialists, would expose the injustice of the system and inspire mass rebellion. While the assassinations gained attention, they rarely achieved their intended effects. Instead, they often strengthened state power. Governments responded with crackdowns, new policing methods, surveillance networks, and stricter laws aimed at suppressing dissidents. Rather than igniting the revolution anarchists envisioned, the violence helped governments justify repressive measures. The psychological impact of these killings also shaped public perception of political life. Leaders became increasingly insulated, protected by new security protocols. Public appearances were choreographed, and spontaneous contact between rulers and citizens grew rare. This shift contributed to the modern image of political leaders as distant figures shielded by layers of protection. Assassinations, therefore, did more than change governments. They changed the relationship between governments and their people. Yet assassination was not always a tool of radicals or revolutionaries. Governments themselves sometimes used targeted killings to eliminate rivals. In 1913, King George I of Greece was murdered, likely by a lone gunman, though conspiracy theories implicated foreign powers seeking influence in the Balkans. His death altered Greek succession at a critical moment. While not as widely remembered as Ferdinand's assassination, it contributed to instability in a region already bracing for conflict. When examining this period, one sees that political murder was not confined to any single ideology or region. It was a method used across political systems, from monarchies to democracies, from empires to colonies. Perhaps the most globally significant assassination after Ferdinand's, but before the mid-20th century, was the killing of Mohandas Gandhi in 1948. While discussed in the previous chapter, it deserves deeper reflection here due to its global influence. Gandhi's philosophy of non-violent resistance inspired movements around the world. His assassination by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist, did more than shock India. It reverberated through civil rights movements from the United States to South Africa. The symbolism of his death emphasized the peril of division in newly independent nations. In India, it triggered a massive backlash against extremism and reinforced the principles of secular democracy embraced by the new government. Gandhi's assassination, unlike many others, strengthened his legacy and spread his message further than he could have imagined. While the killer sought to stop Gandhi's influence, the act elevated Gandhi to a global icon of peace. Political assassinations also reshaped emerging nations in the Middle East. In 1948, the same year Gandhi was killed, Count Folke Bernadotte, a United Nations mediator working toward peace in the Israeli-Arab conflict, was assassinated by members of the militant Zionist group Lehi. Bernadotte's proposals were controversial, and his killers viewed him as a threat to the establishment of Israel's borders. His death removed a diplomatic voice during a critical phase of conflict and negotiations. It complicated international relations and hardened the positions of multiple parties. In many ways, Bernadotte's assassination symbolized the difficulty of achieving compromise in a region defined by overlapping national aspirations. Across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, assassinations played crucial roles in independence movements. Leaders who advocated for peaceful transitions often became targets for those who feared compromise. In 1947, Burmese independence leader Aung San was assassinated along with several ministers. His death deprived Burma of a unifying figure at the exact moment it prepared to become a sovereign nation. The result was decades of political instability and military aggression. Here again, the assassination of a reformist voice strengthened hardliners and set a troubled course for the nation. What emerges from examining these political killings is a clear pattern. Assassinations influence history most profoundly when they occur at moments of transition or crisis. When nations are stable, institutions can absorb the shock. But when nations stand on the edge of transformation, when political systems are fragile, or when ideological tensions run high, the removal of one leader can tilt the entire structure. The 19th and early 20th centuries were filled with such moments. The world was undergoing massive change. Industrialization, nationalism, imperial decline, and the rise of new ideologies. These shifts created an environment in which political violence had unprecedented power to alter history. Yet, despite the number of influential assassinations in this period, it is important to remember that not all assassins had coherent political goals. Some were driven by delusion or personal grievance. Others acted impulsively. But regardless of motive, the significance of their actions was determined largely by context. This is one of the central lessons of political history. Assassinations do not matter because of the individuals involved alone. They matter because of the systems in which those individuals lived. Killing a leader has impact only when the society is primed for upheaval. As we continue forward, we will enter the mid-20th century, a period dominated by world wars, ideological extremism, decolonization, and the Cold War. In this era, assassination reached new heights of geopolitical influence. Intelligence agencies began using political killings as covert tools. Revolutionary movements targeted leaders aligned with foreign powers, and technological advances made such attacks both easier and more globally visible. The assassinations of this period, from John F. Kennedy to Patrice Lumumba to various leaders across the Cold War's proxy fronts, would reshape continents and redefine global politics. These coming chapters will explore how assassination evolved from the weapon of lone radicals and nationalist movements into a strategic instrument wielded by states, insurgent groups, and ideological forces. As the world became more interconnected, the consequences of political murder grew even more far-reaching. A single event in one nation could shift alliances, alter superpower strategy, or ignite regional conflict. Thus, the story of assassination in the modern era becomes not only a story of violence, but a story of global interdependence. The mid-20th century marks the point at which assassination began to intersect with global geopolitics in a way previously unimaginable. The world wars had reorganized boundaries, reshaped alliances, and created vast ideological divides that cut across continents. Old empires collapsed, new nations emerged, and superpowers extended their reach into every corner of the globe. It was a period of profound transformation, and with transformation comes instability. In such moments, assassinations no longer influenced only a single country. They often influenced the world's balance of power. The stakes grew higher. Intelligence agencies were born or expanded. Political movements hardened into ideological blocs, and the Cold War created an atmosphere in which every act, violent or otherwise, was interpreted through the lens of global rivalry. Assassination, once the domain of lone radicals or isolated conspirators, now became part of a larger political chessboard in which nations maneuvered through covert operations, clandestine alliances, and proxy conflicts. One of the most influential assassinations of this era occurred in 1948, when the charismatic Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba was murdered. At the time, the Congo was transitioning from Belgian colonial rule toward independence. Lumumba was seen by many Western powers as a potential threat due to his nationalist rhetoric and perceived openness to Soviet support. His assassination, carried out with the involvement of foreign interests, reshaped the future of Central Africa. After his death, the Congo descended into decades of dictatorship, civil conflict, and foreign interference. Lumumba's removal symbolized the broader dynamic of the Cold War. Superpowers sought to shape the politics of newly decolonized nations, often through force. His murder stands as one of the most tragic examples of a promising leader whose life was cut short just as his vision for a new African nation was taking form. And its consequences were catastrophic, triggering instability that still echoes in the region today. Another assassination that profoundly influenced decolonization occurred in 1949 with the killing of Syrian leader Hosni al-Zaim. His brief leadership and abrupt overthrow signaled the beginning of a period in which military coups and political violence defined the politics of multiple Middle Eastern states. Though not as globally famous as some events, his assassination helped set the pattern for instability in Syria during the decades that followed. In this sense, it exemplifies how assassinations in newly independent or rapidly changing countries can derail fragile political structures before they ever have the chance to solidify. But no assassination of the 20th century has been studied, debated, and mythologized as intensely as the killing of John F. Kennedy in 1963. Kennedy represented youth, idealism, and a modern vision for global leadership. His presidency came at the height of the Cold War, during the most dangerous nuclear tensions the world had ever experienced. When he was shot in Dallas, Texas, the world froze. The scenes that followed, panic, disbelief, and the rapid transition of power, exemplified how deeply interconnected nations had become. The United States, as the leading superpower, influenced every region, every alliance, every conflict. Kennedy's assassination instantly became a global event, not merely an American tragedy. While the official conclusion identified Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin, the complexity of Cold War politics ensured that conspiracy theories proliferated. People speculated about foreign governments, intelligence agencies, anti-Castro activists, pro-Castro activists, organized crime networks, and internal political enemies. The very fact that so many theories emerged reflects how people perceived Kennedy's role in world affairs. The idea that a single individual acting alone could remove such a significant figure felt unbelievable to many. Yet regardless of who pulled the trigger, the impact of Kennedy's death was undeniable. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, escalated U.S. military involvement in Vietnam and pursued domestic reforms that Kennedy had only begun to envision. The Vietnam War alone reshaped global politics, triggered widespread protests, transformed U.S. society, and influenced international relations for decades. Thus, Kennedy's assassination did not simply end a presidency. It redirected the trajectory of American foreign and domestic policy in ways no one could fully predict. The 1960s were marked by a series of assassinations that exposed deep social tensions, particularly within democratic societies. In the United States, the killings of Malcolm X in 1965 and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 revealed the fragile foundation of civil rights progress. Malcolm X had begun shifting from militant separatism toward a more nuanced global perspective on oppression shortly before his death. His assassination fragmented the organizations he influenced and altered the course of Black nationalist movements. Martin Luther King Jr., the leading figure of nonviolent civil rights activism, was killed only 3 years later. King's assassination triggered riots, grief, and political upheaval across the country. It forced the implementation of legislation, but also deepened racial divides. These events illustrate how assassinations of non-state actors can reshape social movements just as profoundly as the killings of political leaders. In many nations, assassinations during this era became strategic tools wielded by insurgent groups and extremist organizations. In the Middle East, the assassination of Jordanian Prime Minister Wasfi al-Tal in 1971 by Black September members underscored the complex tensions between Palestinian factions and Arab governments. It demonstrated how revolutionary groups used targeted killings to pressure states they viewed as obstacles to their goals. In Israel, the 1995 assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by a Jewish extremist opposed to peace negotiations fundamentally disrupted the peace process. Rabin had come closer than any Israeli leader before him to brokering a lasting agreement with Palestinian leadership. His death shattered that momentum, hardened political camps, and contributed to decades of ongoing conflict. This is one of the clearest modern examples of a single assassination derailing a peace effort with generational consequences. Assassination also became a key instrument in Latin America, where Cold War tensions amplified internal conflicts. In Chile, the 1973 killing of General René Schneider stands out as a pivotal moment preceding the coup against President Salvador Allende. Schneider refused to support the coup, insisting on constitutional order. His assassination removed that crucial barrier and contributed to the environment in which the military, led by Augusto Pinochet, seized power. The coup transformed Chile's political and economic system and led to decades of authoritarian rule. Schneider's death, therefore, represents a strategic assassination that directly facilitated a regime change. Further north, the assassination of Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo in 1961 ended one of the most brutal regimes in Latin America. Unlike many assassinations, this one was backed by segments of the Dominican elite and tacitly supported by foreign powers. While his death ended a tyranny, it also plunged the nation into political uncertainty and external intervention. Sometimes, the removal of a dictator does not immediately lead to democracy, but instead creates a vacuum that competing interests rush to fill. In Asia, the post-war decades were marked by the assassinations of leaders attempting to navigate the complexities of Cold War alignment. South Korea's first president, Syngman Rhee, narrowly escaped assassination attempts, but it was the later killing of President Park Chung-hee in 1979 that truly transformed modern Korean history. Park's authoritarian rule had modernized the country but suppressed political freedoms. His assassination by the director of his own intelligence agency shocked the nation and triggered a rapid succession of political upheavals. The resulting instability ultimately contributed to the democratization movement that reshaped South Korea in the 1980s. In this sense, Park's death became a catalyst for the emergence of a democratic society. India faced its own political turmoil in the 20th century through multiple high-profile assassinations. After Gandhi's death in 1948, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated in 1984 by her Sikh bodyguards following the controversial military operation at the Golden Temple. Her death triggered massive anti-Sikh riots, leaving thousands dead and permanently altering India's political climate. Just 7 years later, her son Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by the Tamil Tigers, a separatist militant group from Sri Lanka. These events not only reshaped Indian politics, but also highlighted how assassinations could emerge from complex regional conflicts, religious tensions, and geopolitical struggles. The cycle of violence in India demonstrated how political killings can perpetuate divisions across generations. Africa, too, saw numerous assassinations that shaped the political landscapes of newly independent nations. In Egypt, President Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981 during a military parade by Islamist militants opposed to his peace treaty with Israel and his efforts to modernize the state. Sadat had made the historic decision to pursue peace, becoming the first Arab leader to formally recognize Israel. His assassination revealed the intense domestic opposition to that decision. His successor, Hosni Mubarak, maintained authoritarian control for decades, shaping Egyptian politics well into the 2010s. Here, the assassination did not end a regime, but rather shifted it into a more conservative and security-oriented phase. Further south, in South Africa, the assassination of Chris Hani in 1993 nearly derailed the peaceful transition away from apartheid. Hani was a prominent leader of the African National Congress and a widely respected figure among black South Africans. His death at the hands of a far-right extremist threatened to ignite widespread violence. But in an extraordinary moment of leadership, Nelson Mandela used the crisis to urge calm and accelerate negotiations. If not for Mandela's intervention, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Hani's assassination serves as a reminder that while a political murder often destabilizes societies, the response of other leaders can determine whether chaos follows or peace prevails. In the broader context of the Cold War, assassinations increasingly became the domain of intelligence agencies, secret police networks, and covert operations. Both superpowers, along with their allies, engaged in actions intended to remove hostile leaders or destabilize rival states. Some of these operations were successful, others not. The attempted assassination of Fidel Castro, for example, became legendary for its almost absurd number of failed plots. The CIA and anti-Castro groups attempted more than a dozen schemes ranging from poisoned cigars to exploding seashells. While Castro survived all attempts, the sheer scale of efforts to kill him revealed how deeply assassination had become embedded in Cold War rivalry. Castro's continued survival became a symbol of resistance to foreign intervention. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, dissidents and defectors frequently became targets of assassination by Soviet or Eastern Bloc security services. The killing of Bulgarian writer Georgi Markov in London in 1978, using a poisoned umbrella tip, became one of the most chilling examples of Cold War-style elimination. Markov's death demonstrated the lengths to which authoritarian regimes would go to silence critics abroad. This era saw assassinations carried out not for ideological upheaval, but for the maintenance of state power and suppression of dissent. By the late 20th century, assassination had evolved into a complex instrument of global politics. It could be used to launch coups, to derail peace processes, to intimidate populations, or to manipulate political transitions. At the same time, new technologies, improved intelligence capabilities, and international media transformed both the execution of political killings and their global impact. The world had become interconnected and fast-moving, meaning a single assassination could trigger immediate international consequences. The nature of political legitimacy had also changed. Leaders were no longer merely rulers of their own nations. They were global figures whose deaths resonated beyond borders. What this century teaches us is that assassinations are rarely just acts of violence. They are inflection points. They are tests of political structures, exposing strengths and weaknesses. They are reflections of fears of change, fears of rival ideologies, fears of lost power. When a leader is removed, a society reveals its true nature. Whether it fractures or unites, whether it hardens or transitions, whether it escalates conflict or seeks reconciliation. As we move into the next chapters, the focus will shift toward the assassinations that shaped the late 20th and early 21st centuries. These include killings connected to terrorism, organized crime, religious extremism, and geopolitical transitions. Just as the Cold War defined the earlier decades, globalization and technological advancement defined the later ones. And in this new environment, the role of assassination once again transformed, becoming part of modern conflicts in ways that continue to unfold today. By the final decades of the 20th century, the nature of assassination had evolved once more. Nations were no longer merely emerging from colonial rule or navigating the ideological battle lines of the Cold War. Instead, a new era of global interconnectedness, expanding media networks, and rapid geopolitical shifts created fresh conditions under which political killings could reshape entire regions. Assassinations no longer needed to be carried out by states or clandestine intelligence agencies alone. They could also be executed by extremist movements, terrorist networks, organized crime groups, or individuals radicalized through new forms of propaganda. In this complex and rapidly changing landscape, assassinations became both strategic tools and unpredictable explosions of violence, each with the potential to alter the course of nations. One of the most emblematic assassinations of the late 20th century was the killing of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in 1981. At the time of his death, Sadat was one of the most important Middle Eastern leaders, having made the bold and controversial decision to sign a peace treaty with Israel in 1979. The agreement earned him international praise, but sparked rage among many in the Arab world, who saw it as a betrayal of Palestinian aspirations. Even within Egypt, extremist factions viewed him as a traitor to Islam and the Arab cause. Sadat was assassinated during a military parade by members of a radical offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood who had infiltrated the Egyptian armed forces. His death exposed the deep ideological divides within Egypt and drastically altered the nation's political trajectory. His successor, Hosni Mubarak, responded with heavy-handed security policies that shaped Egyptian society for decades. The assassination thus shifted Egypt from a period of relative openness to one defined by authoritarian repression, contributing to long-term tensions that would eventually help fuel the Arab Spring. Around the same time, another assassination far from the Middle East shook Asia to its core. In 1984, India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was killed by her own Sikh bodyguards following Operation Blue Star, the military assault on the Golden Temple in Amritsar. The attack on the sacred Sikh temple had outraged Sikh communities worldwide. Gandhi's assassination triggered a wave of anti-Sikh violence that left thousands dead and deepened religious divisions in India. The political fallout was immediate. Her son Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister, and Indian politics entered a turbulent period marked by insurgency, counterinsurgency, and growing polarization. The reverberations of her death persisted for decades, shaping security policies, political rhetoric, and ethnic relations. Indira Gandhi's assassination remains one of the clearest examples of how political violence can unleash widespread communal conflict. But political killings during this period were not limited to regional leaders or heads of state. The assassination of Pakistan's General Zia-ul-Haq in 1988, though shrouded in mystery, proved equally consequential. His plane crashed under suspicious circumstances, killing him along with several top officials and the US ambassador to Pakistan. Zia's 11 years of rule had dramatically altered Pakistan's political and social landscape, embedding military influence into civilian life and promoting a radical religious agenda as part of the Soviet-Afghan war effort. His sudden death created a power vacuum that helped usher in a brief return to civilian rule. Yet the long-term effects of his policies, including the empowerment of militant groups, continued to shape Pakistan's politics long after his death. Whether his death was an accident, sabotage, or assassination remains debated, but its impact is undeniable. Moving towards Southeast Asia, the Philippines experienced one of the most politically electrifying assassinations of the late 20th century, when opposition leader Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. was killed in 1983 upon returning from exile. Under Ferdinand Marcos's authoritarian regime, the Philippines was trapped in political and economic stagnation. Aquino's return symbolized hope for democratic change. His assassination on the airport tarmac, executed in broad daylight, shocked the nation and catalyzed the People Power Revolution. Ultimately, the mass protests and civil disobedience that followed forced Marcos into exile and restored democracy under Aquino's widow, Corazon Aquino. Few assassinations have so clearly produced the opposite outcome of what the perpetrators likely intended. The killing of a popular political opponent, meant to preserve an authoritarian regime, instead ignited the uprising that toppled it. In Latin America, similar patterns emerged in which the removal of reformers or dissidents reshaped entire nations. The 1980 assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero in El Salvador stands as one of the most influential political killings in the region's modern history. Romero had become an outspoken critic of the Salvadoran government's human rights abuses during the country's civil war. His weekly sermons, broadcast nationwide, condemned both military repression and guerrilla violence. He was shot by a death squad while celebrating Mass. His assassination intensified international attention on the Salvadoran conflict and pushed the country further into civil war. At the same time, Romero transformed into a global symbol of social justice. His death highlighted how assassinations of moral leaders, rather than political rulers, can galvanize entire movements, shaping not only national politics but also global human rights activism. Assassinations in this period also intersected with organized crime, which had grown increasingly powerful in regions like Italy, Colombia, and Mexico. In 1992, Italy was shaken by the murders of anti-mafia judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. These killings were orchestrated by the Sicilian mafia in retaliation for the judges' relentless efforts to prosecute organized crime networks. The bombings were so destructive and public that they sparked national outrage, leading to sweeping reforms of Italy's legal and law enforcement systems. In a paradoxical way, the mafia's attempt to eliminate its greatest threats ended up triggering the largest anti-mafia mobilization in Italian history. Falcone and Borsellino became martyrs of justice, and their deaths dramatically altered the state's relationship with organized crime. In Colombia, the assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in 1989 by drug cartel operatives had similarly vast consequences. Galán was a vocal opponent of the cartels, particularly the Medellin cartel led by Pablo Escobar. His killing shocked the nation and prompted the government to intensify its crackdown on cartel activity. The resulting conflict escalated into a violent struggle that altered Colombia's political landscape and contributed to one of the most infamous crime waves in modern history. Cartel-related assassinations, in this sense, were not simply criminal acts but catalytic political events that shaped government policies and international relations. The late 20th century also witnessed assassinations that defined the politics of the Middle East and Central Asia during a time of growing extremism. In 1995, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by a right-wing extremist who opposed the Oslo peace accords. The killing effectively halted the peace process, shifting public opinion, empowering hardline factions, and deepening mistrust between Israelis and Palestinians. Rabin had been one of the few leaders with the political capital and military credibility to push for reconciliation. His removal changed the course of the conflict for generations. This assassination is often cited as one of the most damaging political killings of the modern era because it halted momentum at a moment when peace seemed possible. In 2001, Ahmed Shah Massoud, leader of the Northern Alliance and one of the most important anti-Taliban figures in Afghanistan, was assassinated by al-Qaeda operatives posing as journalists. The timing was profoundly significant. Massoud was killed just 2 days before the September 11 attacks in the United States. His assassination was intended to weaken Afghan resistance to the Taliban in anticipation of the global conflict that al-Qaeda hoped to unleash. After 9/11, the United States invaded Afghanistan, relying heavily on the Northern Alliance. If Massoud had survived, he would have played a central role in the nation's political reconstruction. Instead, his absence created a leadership void that profoundly shaped Afghanistan's post-2001 trajectory. His assassination thus intertwined with global events, illustrating how political killings can be precursors to vast shifts in international conflict. The 21st century brought with it new dimensions of political assassination, shaped by globalization, digital communication, and rapidly evolving extremist networks. The assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005, carried out through a massive car bomb, was one such event. Hariri had been working to stabilize Lebanon's economy and assert independence from Syrian political influence. His death triggered the Cedar Revolution, a massive public uprising that ultimately forced the withdrawal of Syrian troops from Lebanon. Yet it also plunged the country into a prolonged period of political polarization and occasional violence. The assassination highlighted how targeted political killings in fragile states could immediately alter power dynamics, reshaping both domestic and regional alliances. Within Russia and former Soviet states, the assassination of journalists, activists, and dissidents became increasingly prominent in the global spotlight. The 2006 murder of journalist Anna Politkovskaya, known for her criticism of the Chechen conflict and the Russian government, became a symbol of the dangers facing independent reporters in authoritarian environments. While not an assassination of a political leader, the killing had enormous political implications, influencing global perceptions of freedom of expression in Russia and casting light on the violent suppression of dissent. Similarly, the poisoning of former Russian intelligence officer Alexander Litvinenko in London that same year drew international outrage and highlighted the reach of modern political assassinations across borders. Even in democratic nations where political killing had become rare, the phenomenon reappeared in unexpected ways. The 2016 assassination of British MP Joe Cox by a far-right extremist shocked the United Kingdom and Europe. Cox was a vocal advocate for humanitarian causes and had opposed the rising tide of nationalist rhetoric surrounding the Brexit referendum. Her death demonstrated how political polarization, amplified by new forms of media, could inspire acts of violence even in societies long insulated from such shocks. Similar patterns emerged in other nations, where the boundaries between political activism and violent extremism became increasingly blurred. As the modern world entered an era dominated by the internet, social networks, and globalized ideas, assassinations began to occur in a new informational landscape. A political killing was no longer a local or national event. It instantly became an international flashpoint, dissected, debated, and broadcast across the world in real time. The motivations behind assassinations became more diffuse and sometimes more chaotic. Lone individuals radicalized online could carry out acts that previously required coordinated networks. Meanwhile, extremist groups could leverage global communications to inspire violence far beyond their physical reach. At the same time, technological advancements provided new tools for targeted killings, from sophisticated explosives to emerging cyber-assisted operations. the moral and legal debates surrounding targeted drone strikes, for instance, transformed how states approached the elimination of perceived threats. These developments complicated the definition of assassination itself, blurring the line between covert warfare, counterterrorism, and political killing. The assassinations of the late 20th and early 21st centuries reveal a complex truth. Political violence evolves with societies, technologies, and ideologies, yet its consequences remain surprisingly consistent. Assassinations tend to magnify instability, empower extremists, derail peace efforts, or force abrupt political shifts. Even when they eliminate brutal dictators or dangerous extremists, they often unleash unpredictable new dynamics that reshape the future for better or worse. This chapter demonstrates how assassination became intertwined with global systems during the late 20th century, but the story is far from over. As we move forward in the next chapters, we will explore how assassination continues to shape political landscapes in the 21st century, the lessons history offers about the effectiveness of political violence, and the recurring patterns that define these tragic, yet influential events. By the early 21st century, assassination had entered yet another phase of evolution. Globalization, rapid communication technology, new forms of ideological extremism, and the changing nature of warfare all redefined what it meant to remove a political figure through targeted violence. Unlike earlier eras, in which assassinations were carried out by lone gunmen, conspiratorial groups, or rival political factions, the modern world introduced a dizzying array of possible actors. Terrorist networks, rogue military units, organized crime syndicates, political extremists, separatist movements, intelligence agencies, and even individuals radicalized through online echo chambers could all become agents of political killing. The boundaries separating these categories grew increasingly blurred, creating a world where assassinations could no longer be easily predicted, categorized, or contained. This chapter explores how the 21st century reshaped the phenomenon, examining the assassinations that define the era and exploring the global implications of these events. One of the earliest major assassinations in the 21st century occurred in 2007, when former Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto was killed in a suicide attack during an election rally. Bhutto was a deeply polarizing figure, celebrated by many as a symbol of democratic aspirations, yet criticized by others for corruption and dynastic politics. Her assassination took place in a country already teetering on the edge of political chaos. Pakistan was navigating a volatile mixture of militant extremism, military influence over civilian institutions, and fragile democratic processes. Her death plunged the nation into deeper instability. The immediate aftermath saw riots, accusations of conspiracies, and a dramatic shift in Pakistan's political trajectory. Bhutto's assassination exemplified the complex interplay between domestic terrorism, political rivalry, and social polarization in a modern nuclear-armed state. It illustrated how extremist violence could shape democratic outcomes by eliminating popular and symbolic leaders at crucial moments. Another prominent case from the same region was the assassination of Afghan Vice President and former anti-Taliban commander Abdul Qadir in 2002, soon after the fall of the Taliban regime. His death exposed the fragility of Afghanistan's new political order and underscored the deep divisions between different factions competing for power after decades of war. Political killings in Afghanistan did not stop there. Throughout the next 2 decades, numerous politicians, tribal leaders, and activists were targeted. These assassinations revealed a central truth of modern conflict zones. When formal government structures are weak, political killings become tools of negotiation, coercion, and strategic dominance. The vacuum created by conflict turns assassination into an extension of political bargaining rather than an anomaly. The assassination of Russian politician Boris Nemtsov in 2015 offers another example of how modern targeted killings can reverberate far beyond the borders of the nation in which they occur. Nemtsov, a former deputy prime minister and outspoken critic of Russian government policies, was shot near the Kremlin in one of the most secure locations in the country. The symbolism was undeniable. His death sent shockwaves throughout the global political landscape and intensified scrutiny of Russia's treatment of dissenters. While the official investigation named individual perpetrators, many observers saw the assassination as part of a broader pattern of violence targeting opposition figures, journalists, and activists. Nemtsov's killing highlighted how assassinations in modern authoritarian contexts are often intended not only to eliminate an opponent, but to silence a network of critics and reshape public discourse through fear. In contrast, certain assassinations that occurred in the modern world fell outside traditional political frameworks altogether. The 2011 killing of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, for example, was not a covert assassination, but the result of a violent uprising supported by NATO intervention. Yet its political effect mirrored that of an assassination. It abruptly removed a long-standing autocratic leader and threw Libya into prolonged instability. Without a strong successor government, Libya splintered into rival factions, resulting in ongoing civil conflict. Gaddafi's death demonstrated how the removal of a powerful figure, even in the context of war, carries the same dangers seen in earlier political assassinations, namely that removing a leader without a clear plan for what follows can unleash chaos. The global war on terror added an entirely new dimension to the concept of assassination. Targeted killings became a central part of counterterrorism strategy, particularly through the use of drones. Figures such as Anwar al-Awlaki, a US-born extremist linked to al-Qaeda, were killed through drone strikes rather than traditional assassination methods. While governments framed such operations as military actions rather than political killings, the ethical and legal debates surrounding targeted elimination blurred the boundaries. The use of drones allowed governments to kill individuals far beyond conventional battlefields, raising questions about due process, sovereignty, and the threshold at which a person becomes a legitimate target. This shift exemplified how technological advancement brought new forms of political violence that did not fit neatly into older categories. Similarly, the 2020 killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a drone strike carried out by the United States marked one of the most consequential targeted killings of the century. Soleimani was not merely a military commander. He was the architect of Iran's regional influence strategy, overseeing proxy groups across the Middle East. His death risked igniting a broader regional war, demonstrating how targeted killings in the modern age can escalate geopolitical tensions in ways as dramatic as traditional assassinations. It also highlighted how state-led targeted eliminations could become major international flashpoints. Iran's retaliation, the global diplomatic crisis, and the fear of further escalation underscored the delicate balance of modern geopolitics. Meanwhile, organized crime in the 21st century continued to use assassination as a central method of maintaining control. In Mexico, drug cartels carried out thousands of targeted killings against political leaders, journalists, activists, and rival gangs. The assassination of Rodolfo Torra Cantu, a gubernatorial candidate in Tamaulipas, in 2010 exemplified how cartels attacked political figures who threatened their influence. In regions where state authority was weak or compromised, assassination became a tool to shape electoral outcomes, enforce territorial control, and intimidate communities. The sheer scale of cartel-related assassinations demonstrated how political killing could become normalized when criminal networks rival the power of the state. Assassinations also persisted within long-standing conflicts, where political and ethnic divisions hardened over generations. The killing of Lebanese politician Pierre Gemayel in 2006, for instance, intensified tensions between pro-Syrian and anti-Syrian factions in Lebanon. His death was one in a series of political assassinations targeting high-profile figures, reflecting the complex entanglement of foreign influence and internal rivalry in Lebanon's political landscape. These killings not only eliminated influential leaders, but also deepened national divisions, reinforcing the idea that political assassination can be both a symptom and a cause of enduring conflict. The assassination of Turkish-Armenian journalist Hrant Dink in 2007 further illustrates the global rise of political violence driven by ethnic nationalism. Dink advocated for reconciliation between Turks and Armenians, challenging deeply ingrained historical narratives. His murder by a nationalist youth highlighted the dangers faced by writers and intellectuals who attempt to confront nationalist ideologies. The massive public outcry following his death revealed widespread desire for change, yet the assassination also demonstrated how extremist elements can violently resist any movement toward mutual understanding. In Western democracies, the phenomenon of political assassination re-emerged in unexpected ways. The 2011 killing of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme had already shown decades earlier that even the most stable societies are not immune, but modern technology and online radicalization introduced new threats. As seen in the assassination of Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh in 2004, targeted killings in Europe increasingly reflected cultural and ideological tensions, particularly around issues of immigration, religious identity, and freedom of expression. Van Gogh's murder by an extremist motivated by religious and political grievances triggered intense debate across Europe about multiculturalism and extremism. It demonstrated how assassinations in democratic societies can influence public policy and political discourse on a massive scale. Similar tensions erupted in the assassination of Russian ambassador Andrei Karlov in Turkey in 2016, carried out by an off-duty police officer who opposed Russia's involvement in the Syrian conflict. The killing occurred during a public event and was broadcast almost instantly around the world. This assassination illustrated both the power of global media and the increasingly international nature of political violence. A single individual, motivated by a foreign conflict, was able to kill a diplomat in a different nation and provoke a global crisis. Diplomatically motivated assassinations had occurred throughout history, but the modern world magnified their impact by connecting nations so closely that the consequences were immediate and widespread. The 21st century also saw targeted killings carried out in attempts to suppress democratic or reformist movements. In Myanmar, the assassination of U Ko Nai, a prominent legal advisor to the ruling party, in 2017 was a devastating blow to efforts to reform the military-drafted constitution. His death symbolized the resistance of entrenched power structures to democratic change. It showed how assassinations in fragile democracies could halt momentum, intimidate reformers, and preserve authoritarian influence. In Somalia, the targeted killings of political figures by extremist groups such as Al-Shabaab became a central tactic in destabilizing government institutions. High-profile assassinations of ministers, parliamentarians, and peace activists throughout the 2000s and 2010s illustrated how political murder could systematically erode governance. In such contexts, assassination was not about removing individuals, but undermining the idea of a functioning state altogether. Despite these modern complexities, one constant remained. Assassinations often served as turning points. The 2006 murder of former Russian FSB agent Alexander Litvinenko, poisoned with radioactive polonium, illustrated how assassination could become an act of international messaging. Carried out in London using a rare radioactive isotope, the killing was a demonstration of reach, capability, and intimidation. It shocked the world, strained diplomatic relations, and forced democratic nations to reconsider their approaches to protecting dissidents and refugees. The method itself, using nuclear material, represented how modern assassinations could blend political motives with scientific sophistication, creating acts that were both lethal and symbolic. In the 21st century, social media and global news networks also changed how assassinations were perceived. When political killings occurred, they were not merely reported but dissected in real time by millions. This instantaneous global attention created new incentives for extremist groups seeking maximum publicity. Assassination became a form of performance, staged to achieve shock value and media dominance. This shift raised profound questions about the relationship between media and political violence. Yet even with all these transformations, assassinations in the modern era often displayed the same patterns observed throughout history. Removing a leader at a moment of political tension typically pushed societies toward greater instability. Eliminating reformists empowered extremists. Killing dictators created power vacuums ripe for conflict. Silencing journalists or activists emboldened repressive regimes. The context may have changed, but the consequences echoed the past. As we move into the next chapters, the narrative will begin to tie together the patterns that have emerged across centuries. What makes certain assassinations truly transformative? Why do some killings alter the course of nations while others fade into relative obscurity? And what do these events reveal about the nature of power, resistance, and political change? To understand these answers, we must examine not only individual assassinations, but the structural forces that give them meaning. Across centuries, assassinations have acted like sudden ruptures in the narrative of history. Abrupt breaks where the trajectory of a nation forks in two, where events that seemed predictable suddenly veer into uncertainty, and where human lives, movements, and ideas collide with violent force. Yet as the 21st century progressed and more time passed since the Cold War, a deeper question emerged. Why do some assassinations fundamentally reshape the world, while others fade into obscurity or only alter politics at a local level? On the surface, the answer appears simple. Certain leaders hold more power than others, but the truth is far more complex. Power alone does not determine historical impact. The most influential assassinations arise at the intersection of timing, symbolism, political context, and the expectations placed upon their victims. These killings are not isolated events, but accelerations of forces already in motion. To understand the most world-changing assassinations, we must look beyond the act itself and examine the conditions that give it meaning. One of the clearest examples of this deeper pattern can be found in the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire was not widely admired, nor did many Europeans view him as central to political life. Yet his death, in the context of rising nationalism and fragile alliances, triggered the First World War. The assassination mattered not because of Ferdinand's personal power, but because Europe was already a powder keg primed to explode. It is the convergence of broader social and political pressures with a targeted act of violence that transforms a killing into a historical turning point. Without the larger tensions of the era, Princeps shots would have been tragic, but not world-changing. The same pattern appeared repeatedly throughout the 20th century. The killing of Yitzhak Rabin in 1995 altered the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it occurred at a moment when a fragile peace process depended heavily on trust, charisma, and political will. Rabin was one of the few leaders with the credibility to guide his nation toward compromise. His death removed not just a man, but a unique political formula, experience, military authority, and pragmatic leadership that could not simply be replaced. In this sense, assassination is most impactful when it eliminates what social scientists sometimes describe as an irreplaceable node in the political network. Some leaders are central not because of their formal power, but because only they can bridge certain ideological divides. This insight helps explain why the assassinations of certain reformers, dissidents, or activists can have significant historical consequences even when those individuals do not hold state office. When Mahatma Gandhi was killed, India did not collapse. The state remained intact. But his death removed a moral compass during a moment of national vulnerability. Gandhi's presence had provided a stabilizing force capable of calming tensions and encouraging reconciliation during communal violence. Without him, the country moved forward but carried deeper wounds. Gandhi's assassination demonstrates that political killing affects not only formal governance, but also the symbolic foundations of society, those intangible currents of hope, identity, memory, and collective belief that shape how nations understand themselves. The death of an activist like Martin Luther King Jr. shows a similar phenomenon. Though he did not hold government power, King shaped the trajectory of American civil rights with extraordinary influence. His assassination did not end the movement, but it shifted its course. It triggered unrest, strengthened radical factions who saw nonviolence as futile, and forced political leaders to confront the urgency of reform. King's death pushed the movement into a new phase, one defined simultaneously by legislative gains and heightened societal fracture. Assassinations of symbolic leaders often matter because they alter the psychological landscape of a nation, creating moments of grief, anger, or fear that ripple across generations. In contrast, political assassinations sometimes fail to alter history in lasting ways, and those failures illuminate another key principle. The strength of institutions determines how deeply an assassination will be felt. In nations with strong constitutions, stable governance structures, and predictable succession systems, the removal of a leader may be shocking but does not fundamentally destabilize politics. When U.S. President Gerald Ford survived 2 assassination attempts in 1975, the incidents created alarm but did not threaten the stability of the American government. Even if one of the attempts had succeeded, the constitutional system was strong enough to ensure continuity. This is why many assassinations in stable democracies have had limited historical impact, despite the tragedies they create. Institutions act as shock absorbers. The role of institutions also helps explain why assassinations in authoritarian regimes often produce greater instability. When power is concentrated in a single individual, removing that leader can create a vacuum that no institution is prepared to fill. The assassination of Congolese Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba in 1961 plunged the nation into decades of instability, in part because the state lacked the structures necessary to sustain governance without him. Similarly, the killing of General Rafael Trujillo in 1961 ended a dictatorship in the Dominican Republic, but also created turbulence because the regime had been built around Trujillo's personal authority rather than robust state systems. Assassinations are most disruptive when they expose the fragility of political structures that cannot survive the sudden absence of a central figure. In some cases, assassination functions less as a rupture and more as a revealing moment that exposes pre-existing tensions. The assassination of Benazir Bhutto in 2007 did not create instability in Pakistan, it revealed it. Extremist violence, political polarization, and military dominance were already present. Her death simply forced them into the open. Likewise, the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005 exposed the deep divisions between pro-Syrian and anti-Syrian factions, sparking mass protests that culminated in Syria's withdrawal from Lebanon. These assassinations mattered because they accelerated political processes that were already unfolding, providing a sudden catalyst for change. Symbolism plays a central role in amplifying the effects of assassination. The death of a leader is not simply an event, it becomes a story. And stories hold extraordinary power. When a prominent figure is assassinated, societies often interpret the killing as a message or a sign, a commentary on the state of the nation, the fragility of peace, or the depths of division. The assassination of John F. Kennedy became symbolic of lost innocence in the United States, representing a turning point in American optimism and civic trust. It generated myths, conspiracies, and cultural narratives that extended far beyond the political consequences of the event itself. The assassination's effect on morale, identity, and imagination contributed to its lasting historical significance. Similarly, the assassination of Archbishop Oscar Romero transformed him into a martyr for human rights. His death became a symbol of resistance against oppression, inspiring movements that stretched far beyond El Salvador. The symbolic power of an assassination can sometimes eclipse its immediate political impact. A leader may not have been able to achieve sweeping reforms in life, yet their death galvanizes others to carry forward their vision. This illustrates how assassinations can shape history not only through disruption, but through inspiration. Yet the symbolic weight of assassination also carries darker implications. When extremist groups kill political leaders, they often aim to send a message of fear, dominance, or rejection of compromise. The assassination of Yitzhak Rabin is a striking example. The killer sought to stop the peace process not through debate or policy, but through the elimination of a symbol of peace. The killing communicated that violence could override democratic decision-making. Similarly, assassinations carried out by cartels, insurgent groups, or organized crime networks convey messages of control. We decide who lives and dies. We choose who governs. We can reach anyone. These acts terrorize populations and demonstrate the capacity of non-state actors to shape political outcomes. Another pattern emerges when examining assassinations across different cultures and eras. The most impactful assassinations occur when the leader's death changes the alignment of internal factions. In places where politics depend on fragile alliances between rival groups, the removal of one leader can cause a dramatic realignment. The assassination of Burundi's first democratically elected Hutu president, Melchior Ndadaye, in 1993 ignited a civil war because it upset the delicate balance between Hutu and Tutsi factions. Similarly, the killing of Lebanese leader Pierre Gemayel shifted the balance between competing sectarian alliances during a time of heightened political tension. These assassinations were influential because they altered the internal architecture of power within their societies. Timing is another critical factor. The assassination of a leader at a moment of transition, such as a peace negotiation, independence movement, or democratic reform, can derail processes that depend on trust and continuity. This is why the killings of Rabin, Gandhi, and Aquino had such far-reaching consequences. Each occurred at a moment when momentum toward political change was delicate and required consistent leadership. Their deaths interrupted those processes and allowed hardliners, opportunists, or extremist factions to seize the narrative. Conversely, assassinations carried out outside moments of transition often have limited impact. When political structures are stable, economic conditions predictable, and public sentiment relatively unified, the death of a leader may shock but not transform society. This helps explain why several assassination attempts in Western democracies, though tragic, did not meaningfully change political trajectories. Without broader tensions, the act cannot ignite deeper forces. One of the most intriguing aspects of assassination is how it affects the psychology of political movements. A movement can either fracture under the loss of a leader or unite with renewed determination. The death of Malcolm X, for example, created divisions within black nationalist movements and led to splintered organizations. The death of Che Guevara, conversely, turned him into a global icon for revolutionary struggle, strengthening the symbolic power of the movements he inspired. Whether a movement unites or fractures often depends on whether the leader was a unifying figure or a polarizing one. Assassination also highlights the tension between individual agency and structural forces in history. The act itself is carried out by an individual or small group, yet its consequences arise from social structures far larger than the actors involved. Gavrilo Princip acted out of nationalist passion, but Europe was already moving toward war. John Wilkes Booth saw himself as avenging the Confederacy, but the Civil War's outcome was already sealed. The killer's intentions rarely align with the historical consequences. In many cases, assassins envision themselves as heroes who will reshape history, yet the outcomes they produce are often contradictory to their goals. This disconnect raises another deeper question. Do assassins ever truly achieve their intended aims? In most major historical cases, the answer is no. The assassins of Julius Caesar wanted to save the Republic, but instead accelerated its demise. The killer of Rabin sought to stop negotiations permanently, yet the idea of peace continued to live in the public imagination. The conspirators who killed Abraham Lincoln sought to revive the Confederate cause, yet the South's defeat had already been cemented. Assassination often produces unintended consequences because history is shaped not by singular events alone, but by the larger forces into which those events intervene. Still, assassinations can dramatically alter individual destiny. Removing a leader prevents their future contributions, policies, or decisions from shaping history. This counterfactual aspect is difficult to measure but profoundly important. What might Kennedy have achieved if he had lived? What direction would India have taken under Indira Gandhi's continued leadership? What peace agreements or reforms might have been realized if certain leaders had been allowed to complete their work? These questions remind us that the impact of assassination is not only in what it causes, but in what it prevents. Assassination also carries a deep cultural and emotional resonance. It represents a breach of norms, a violation of the implicit social contract that political change should occur through debate, not bloodshed. Societies respond to assassination with grief, fear, anger, or renewed political engagement. These emotional reactions shape public consciousness and influence political behavior. When a leader is assassinated, the public often projects hopes, fears, and meaning onto the event, transforming it into a symbolic turning point even when the actual political consequences are more complex. As history reveals, assassinations are most influential when they occur in societies balancing between competing futures. A society uncertain of its path is more likely to be reshaped by the sudden removal of a central figure. The next chapters will continue exploring these themes by examining how assassinations shape not only political systems, but collective memory, national identity, and the broader human understanding of power and change. If the earlier chapters explored the mechanics and consequences of individual assassinations, this chapter moves deeper into the human dimension. The emotional, psychological, and cultural responses societies develop in the aftermath of political killings. Assassinations do not merely change the direction of political events, they also alter the stories nations tell about themselves. They become anchors of collective memory, moments that define eras, and symbols that help people understand broader historical transformations. Whether the victim was a reformist leader, a revolutionary, a monarch, or an activist, the way societies process their death reveals profound truths about how humans confront trauma, change, and uncertainty. To understand this, consider how many nations use assassination as a marker in their historical timeline. In the United States, people often divide the 20th century into before Kennedy and after Kennedy, not because the assassination changed every aspect of American life, but because the event became a psychological turning point. In India, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi is woven into national identity as the final tragedy of partition and the loss of a moral guide. In Israel, Yitzhak Rabin's assassination is remembered not only as a political event, but as a cultural trauma that reshaped public understanding of peace, nationalism, and the fragility of democracy. These examples highlight a recurring pattern. Assassination often becomes a symbolic shorthand for deeper societal anxieties. The shock of losing a leader is amplified by the symbolic meaning attached to that leader. When a political killing occurs, people search for explanations, meanings, and lessons. The collective imagination fills with questions. What did this person represent? What future did their death prevent? What forces in society were strong enough, angry enough, or desperate enough to kill? These questions may not always have simple answers, but they shape the narratives that emerge in the aftermath. Collective mourning is one of the most powerful responses to political assassination. Public funerals, memorials, vigils, and anniversaries create a ritualized space where grief becomes a shared experience. In such moments, the distinction between personal and national mourning evaporates. The assassination becomes not just a tragedy for the victim's family, but for the entire society. Consider the aftermath of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. The outpouring of grief, anger, and reflection became part of the civil rights movement's evolving identity. Similarly, the global mourning following the killing of Pakistan's Benazir Bhutto was not simply about her life, but about the fragility of democracy in a deeply divided nation. Yet mourning is not always unifying. Assassinations can expose or deepen divisions that were previously hidden beneath the surface. When leaders represent one faction in a divided society, their deaths can trigger not unity, but polarization. This was the case after the assassination of Lebanon's Rafik Hariri. His killing intensified political factionalism, with each side interpreting the assassination through its own ideological lens. In such contexts, the assassination becomes a mirror reflecting the fractured state of society. The symbolic power of assassination can also shape national myths. Stories of martyrdom, sacrifice, betrayal, and heroism become embedded in literature, film, education, and cultural memory. Figures like Julius Caesar, Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, and Oscar Romero become not only historical figures, but archetypes, symbols of ideals such as justice, peace, reform, or unity. These myths often simplify complex individuals into larger-than-life figures, turning their deaths into moral lessons. The process of myth-making reveals as much about the society creating the myth as about the person who died. At times, assassination myths serve political purposes. In authoritarian regimes, the assassination of a leader can be framed as proof of external enemies or internal traitors, allowing the government to justify crackdowns, consolidate power, or suppress dissent. Conversely, in revolutionary movements, the assassination of a leader may become a rallying cry, mobilizing supporters through collective outrage. The use of assassination as a political narrative demonstrates how the meaning of an event can be manipulated to serve ideological agendas. The psychological impact of assassination extends beyond collective memory. On a personal level, assassinations generate fear. They challenge the assumption that political conflict can be resolved peacefully. When a leader is killed, people may begin to question the stability of their institutions, the safety of public life, and the reliability of social norms. This fear can lead to political disengagement, apathy, or withdrawal. But it can also produce the opposite reaction: heightened activism, determination, and political mobilization. Fear also interacts with trust. Assassinations can erode trust in institutions, especially when investigations appear incomplete, politicized, or manipulated. This dynamic fuels conspiracy theories, which thrive in environments where trust is low. The assassination of John F. Kennedy remains one of the most analyzed and debated events in modern history precisely because many people distrust the official narrative. Conspiracies proliferate not only because of the event itself, but because the public struggles to believe that a lone individual could alter history so dramatically. The need to find larger patterns, hidden forces, or secret motives reflects an underlying desire for meaning in chaos. In some societies, conspiracy theories become powerful political tools. They can be used to delegitimize opponents, to foster distrust in democratic institutions, or to justify authoritarian measures. The aftermath of assassination becomes fertile ground for these narratives because it represents a moment of collective vulnerability. The search for explanations creates opportunities for manipulation. This dynamic reveals another key insight. The political meaning of an assassination is often shaped as much by the narratives constructed afterward as by the event itself. The cultural impact of assassination also intersects with art, literature, and media. Writers, filmmakers, poets, and musicians often respond to political killings with works that capture the emotional resonance of the moment. These artistic responses can influence how future generations understand the event. Shakespeare's portrayal of Julius Caesar, for example, has shaped Western interpretations of that assassination for centuries, emphasizing themes of betrayal, ambition, and political morality. In modern times, films and documentaries about figures like Lincoln, Gandhi, or Kennedy become part of the cultural archive through which people learn about the past. Artistic representations transform assassinations into moral and philosophical explorations, influencing how societies remember these tragedies. The spread of digital media in the 21st century intensified this phenomenon. Assassinations today become instantly global events, accompanied by online commentary, videos, leaked documents, and competing interpretations. The digital age collapses the time between event and narrative. People around the world witness assassinations, not merely as news reports, but as unfolding spectacles. This immediacy shapes public perception and amplifies the psychological shock. It also makes it easier for misinformation and conspiracy theories to spread in real time. The digital age thus transforms assassination into a globalized form of political communication, with consequences that ripple across continents. In analyzing the broader significance of assassination, it is important to recognize another recurring theme. Assassinations often occur at moments when societies are grappling with competing visions of the future. These visions may involve decisions about war and peace, independence or dependence, reform or repression, nationalism or pluralism, democracy or authoritarianism. When a leader represents a particular vision of the future, their assassination becomes a struggle over that vision. The killing of Rabin was not merely about one man, but about the future of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. The killing of Gandhi was not only about religious tension, but about the moral foundation of India's post-colonial identity. The killing of Romero was not simply an act of violence, but a battle over human rights and social justice. Assassinations force societies to confront these competing futures in abrupt and often painful ways. Because assassination is irreversible, it removes certain possibilities from the historical landscape while opening the door to others. The trajectory that emerges afterward depends on how societies react, whether they embrace resilience or succumb to division, whether they continue the work of the fallen leader or abandon it entirely. In this sense, the most influential assassinations shape not only political structures, but moral choices. Historical memory also plays a crucial role in determining the long-term influence of assassination. Some assassinations remain central to national identity for generations. The deaths of Lincoln, Kennedy, Gandhi, and Rabin are repeatedly commemorated because they symbolize fundamental aspects of their nation's histories. Other assassinations fade from collective memory as political contexts change or as new events overshadow old traumas. The distance of time can either elevate a victim into national mythology or reduce their story to a footnote. This selective remembrance demonstrates how historical narratives are shaped not by objective evaluation, but by the evolving needs and identities of societies. Assassinations also raise important ethical and philosophical questions about the nature of political action. Philosophers and political theorists have long debated whether assassination can ever be morally justified. Some argue that eliminating tyrants may save lives or advance justice. Others maintain that assassination undermines political order and violates the moral principles necessary for stable governance. These debates reflect deep tensions between the ethics of individual action and the necessities of political systems. Real-world assassinations often complicate these debates further because the consequences are unpredictable. Even if an assassin believes they are acting for a noble cause, the outcome may contradict their intentions. Still, the ethical debates surrounding assassination reveal another insight. Political violence is rarely judged solely on the act itself, but on the context in which it occurs. Societies sometimes interpret certain assassinations as acts of heroism while condemning others as acts of evil. These judgments reveal cultural values about legitimacy, authority, justice, and resistance. They reflect how societies interpret their own history and how they navigate the tensions between power and morality. The international dimension of assassination adds further complexity. When political killings involve foreign actors, whether intelligence agencies, foreign-backed militias, or cross-border extremists, they become entangled with issues of sovereignty and international law. The global community may react differently depending on who is killed, where, and by whom. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020 strained relations between major powers and raised questions about the legality of targeted killings in international conflict. The killing of Jamal Khashoggi in 2018 triggered worldwide condemnation and revealed the moral ambiguities of international alliances. These events illustrate how assassination in the 21st century increasingly intersects with global institutions, diplomatic relations, and geopolitical calculations. The larger lesson from this exploration is that assassination is not simply an event in history. It is a window into the complexities of human society. It reveals how power is distributed, how narratives are shaped, how societies cope with trauma, and how the tension between hope and fear drives political behavior. Assassinations are moments when the fault lines of history become visible. They expose what is fragile, contested, or unresolved within a society. They show how closely bound the fate of individuals is to the fate of nations. As we continue into the final chapters, the narrative will broaden to explore the overarching patterns that emerge across centuries of political assassinations. We will examine why certain societies are more susceptible to political violence, how assassinations shape long-term historical development, and what lessons can be drawn from these events. Ultimately, understanding assassination is not merely about recounting tragedies. It is about recognizing the forces that shape human history and the choices communities face in the aftermath of loss. As we near the end of this long journey through history's most influential assassinations, it becomes necessary to step back and examine the larger patterns that bind these events together. Though the contexts vary, ancient empires, feudal kingdoms, industrial nations, modern democracies, and globalized societies, the same underlying themes appear again and again. These themes reveal not only the causes and consequences of political assassination, but also the larger truths about human power, collective identity, and the fragility of political systems. Understanding these patterns allows us to better grasp why some assassinations change the world while others dissolve into obscurity without leaving a lasting mark. One of the most important patterns is that assassination tends to flourish in moments of political uncertainty. When societies experience rapid change, economic upheaval, cultural transformation, shifting alliances, or technological disruption, traditional structures of power often weaken. In these moments, old forms of authority no longer hold the same legitimacy, and new forms have not yet fully emerged. Political leaders attempting reforms may face resistance from those who fear losing power, while radicals may view violence as a shortcut toward achieving their goals. The porous boundaries between possibility and chaos create fertile ground for assassination. A single bullet may appear to offer a solution to problems that are, in reality, far more complex. Take the example of the Russian Empire at the turn of the 20th century. Reformers sought to modernize an entrenched autocracy, while revolutionaries pushed for radical transformation. In this atmosphere, assassins saw their actions as catalysts rather than crimes. The murder of Tsar Alexander Roman II, the most reform-minded ruler Russia had seen in generations, emerged from this tense balance of change and resistance. The reformers wanted to protect moderate progress. The radicals believed that only dramatic upheaval could dismantle tyranny. The assassination did not resolve these debates, it intensified them. This pattern repeated in countless societies facing similar tensions. When the political center cannot hold, assassination emerges as a tool for those seeking to artificially accelerate or halt change. Another major pattern that emerges is the role of ideology. Assassinations often occur when individuals or groups feel that their worldview is under threat. This is true across the political spectrum. Nationalists, revolutionaries, religious extremists, anarchists, separatists, and authoritarian loyalists have all turned to assassination as a means of defending or asserting ideological purity. The assassinations of Indira Gandhi, Yitzhak Rabin, and Anwar Sadat were driven by ideological convictions that framed compromise as betrayal. In each case, the assassin believed they were acting to preserve a sacred value: national identity, religious integrity, territorial vision, or political destiny. This reveals a paradox of ideology. When individuals see their beliefs as absolute, violence becomes not only justified, but virtuous in their eyes. Thus, assassinations often reveal the dangers of dogma untempered by dialogue. Alongside ideology, identity plays a crucial role. Many of the most influential assassinations are rooted in conflicts of identity: ethnic, religious, cultural, or national. When leaders represent a particular identity group, their deaths become symbolic attacks on that group's aspirations. The assassination of Melchior Ndadaye in Burundi, for example, ignited a devastating civil war because it upset the fragile balance between ethnic groups. Similarly, the assassination of Norwegian politician Anna Lindh deeply affected debates about immigration, integration, and national identity in Europe. These examples show how political killings often reflect deeper social divides. Assassination becomes a violent manifestation of unresolved tensions surrounding who belongs to the nation, who holds power, and who gets to define the future. Another recurring theme is the role of modern technology in shaping assassination. In earlier centuries, assassination typically required close proximity: a dagger, a sword, a concealed pistol. This intimacy shaped the nature of political violence. Assassins often had personal motivations or political affiliations that brought them into physical contact with their target. As technology evolved, assassination became increasingly impersonal. Long-range rifles, explosives, remote-triggered devices, and drones distanced the assassin from the act. This shift lowered the threshold for political killing, allowing assassins to act without facing the immediate danger or psychological weight of close-range violence. The emergence of drones and cyber-facilitated targeting in the 21st century raised profound ethical questions about the nature of assassination as a tool of statecraft. The expansion of technology also enabled new forms of detection, surveillance, and prevention. Modern states invest in complex security systems that make traditional assassination attempts far more difficult. As a result, assassins adapted by targeting figures who were less protected: journalists, activists, regional leaders, and public intellectuals. These killings highlight a new pattern: the shifting targets of political violence. While historical assassinations often targeted monarchs or heads of state, modern assassinations increasingly target individuals who shape public discourse rather than formal political power. The murder of journalists like Daphne Caruana Galizia and Jamal Khashoggi demonstrates how modern regimes seek to silence voices that threaten their narrative rather than eliminate traditional political rivals. This shift reflects the changing nature of power in the 21st century, where information often matters as much as official authority. A critical pattern that emerges from centuries of political killing is the role of chance. Many of the most influential assassinations hinged on small, unpredictable moments: mistaken turns, broken security protocols, unexpected opportunities. Gavrilo Princip's opportunity to shoot Archduke Franz Ferdinand arose only because the driver took a wrong turn. John F. Kennedy's open convertible exposed him to Oswald only because of a series of decisions about motorcade visibility. Julius Caesar was murdered partly because he dismissed warnings and went to the Senate on the Ides of March. These moments underscore how fragile the trajectories of nations can be. History often hinges on minor circumstances that could easily have unfolded differently. This element of chance introduces a humbling perspective. While assassins may believe they are changing history through deliberate action, the conditions that permit their success are often shaped by randomness rather than brilliant strategy. Yet, while chance plays a role in the mechanics of assassination, the consequences are driven by structure. Assassinations produce chaos only when political systems are brittle. When institutions are strong, leadership transitions occur smoothly. This distinction helps explain why some assassinations dramatically alter history while others do not. For example, when U.S. President William McKinley was assassinated in 1901, the American political system absorbed the shock. Vice President Theodore Roosevelt took office seamlessly, and the nation remained stable. By contrast, when President Laurent Désiré Kabila was assassinated in the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2001, the country plunged deeper into conflict because institutional stability was lacking. It is the interplay between chance and structure, between unpredictable events and underlying political conditions, that determines the historical impact of assassination. Assassination often functions as a test of legitimacy. When a leader is killed, the response of the society reveals whether the political system has broad support or whether it is held together by the force of the individual alone. The death of a dictator can expose the fragility of regimes built around personality cults. The death of a reformer can reveal how deeply their vision resonated with the public. And the death of a controversial figure can expose divisions that were previously masked by the routines of daily governance. This pattern suggests that assassination acts as a diagnostic tool for political systems, revealing their strengths and weaknesses. Another insight gained from studying assassinations is that violence rarely resolves the underlying issues. More often than not, assassination exacerbates existing tensions. The killing of a leader may delay or disrupt reform, but it cannot erase the forces driving change. The assassination of journalist and activist Anna Politkovskaya did not stop international scrutiny of Russia's policies. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. did not halt the civil rights movement. The killing of Che Guevara did not end revolutionary ideologies in Latin America. Assassination provides only the illusion of resolution. The issues that led the assassin to act remain alive, often intensifying after the event. This leads to another key pattern: unintended consequences. Assassins rarely achieve what they hope to accomplish. They act under the belief that removing a leader will produce a specific outcome, but more often than not, the opposite occurs. The senators who killed Julius Caesar hoped to restore the Republic. Instead, they paved the way for the Roman Empire. The conspirators who assassinated Abraham Lincoln hoped to revive Confederate resistance. Instead, they hardened the resolve of the Union. Extremists who killed Anwar Sadat hoped to derail the peace process. Instead, Egypt continued Sadat's policies under Hosni Mubarak, albeit in a far more authoritarian environment. These cases illustrate that assassins operate under the illusion of control, when in reality, history seldom bends cleanly to their intentions. One of the most fascinating patterns is the role of posthumous influence. Some leaders achieve greater impact in death than in life. This phenomenon occurs when the symbolism of assassination amplifies the meaning of their ideas. Figures like Gandhi, Romero, and Kennedy grew in stature after their deaths, as societies used their legacies to advance causes, heal divisions, or build national identities. Death can transform a leader into an icon, freeing them from the constraints, mistakes, and compromises that defined their political careers. In this sense, assassination sometimes expands the influence of the individual rather than curtailing it. At the same time, assassination can permanently disrupt movements by removing leaders with unique talents, charisma, or authority. The death of Yitzhak Rabin removed one of the few Israeli leaders capable of forging peace. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba eliminated a unifying force at a critical moment in Congolese independence. The killing of Benazir Bhutto deprived Pakistan of a figure who could command both international respect and domestic political influence. These examples show that the impact of assassination depends on the replaceability of the leader. Some individuals possess qualities that cannot be easily reproduced. Their absence creates a crisis of leadership that reshapes political trajectories. Assassinations also reveal the relationship between fear and control. Leaders who are assassinated often occupy positions where they challenge entrenched powers. Their deaths send messages to others who might follow in their path. In authoritarian regimes, political killings communicate the dangers of dissent. In democratic societies, the assassination of activists or reformers can temporarily suppress movements or shift strategies, but fear has limits. Over the long term, assassination can provoke resistance, mobilize supporters, and undermine the legitimacy of those who benefit from the violence. Another crucial pattern emerges when considering how societies memorialize assassinations. Collective memory is not static. Its contours change with political needs, cultural shifts, and generational turnover. The meaning of Julius Caesar's assassination evolved dramatically across centuries. The memory of Abraham Lincoln's death became intertwined with narratives of unity, emancipation, and moral leadership. The memory of Rabin's assassination oscillates between grief, nostalgia, and political controversy. These shifting interpretations demonstrate how the meaning of assassination is never fixed. It evolves as societies rewrite their histories to reflect new priorities. Perhaps the most important overarching pattern is the reminder that assassination is ultimately a symptom, not a cause. It reflects the tensions, fears, hopes, and conflicts present within a society. No assassination occurs in a vacuum. Even the most unexpected political killing reveals deeper forces at work: rivalries, grievances, ideological battles, and structural weaknesses that shape human history. Assassination matters because it exposes these hidden dynamics, condensing them into a single, dramatic moment. As we approach the final chapter, the story of history's most influential assassinations becomes less about individual deaths and more about what these events reveal about human nature. They expose the lengths to which people will go to defend beliefs, protect power, or force change. They reveal how societies cope with loss, find meaning in crisis, and navigate the delicate balance between stability and transformation. These patterns remind us that assassination is not merely a political act. It is a human phenomenon, shaped by fear, ambition, conviction, and the eternal struggle for control over the future. As we reach the final chapter of this long exploration into history's most influential assassinations, the narrative expands beyond specific cases, patterns, or political systems. This last stretch is about what these events ultimately reveal about humanity, our capacity for change, our recurring struggles, and the paradoxical ways we respond to violence. From ancient empires to globalized societies, from lone gunmen to organized conspiracies, from ideological fanatics to opportunistic power brokers, assassination has repeatedly appeared at the crossroads of history, marking moments when societies confront their deepest contradictions. And yet, despite its long presence in human affairs, assassination always feels shocking and new when it occurs. It represents the abrupt rupture of continuity, the shattering of expectations, and the sudden collapse of familiar narratives. The most unsettling truth revealed by centuries of political assassinations is that history often hinges on the actions of individuals operating under extraordinary circumstances. While broad structural forces shape societies, individuals make decisions that can redirect the flow of events. Assassins choose to act because they believe history is within their grasp, that removing one person will achieve what diplomacy, elections, or reforms cannot. Whether they act from fanaticism, fear, vengeance, desperation, or misguided idealism, their perception of influence drives them. Yet the outcomes they produce rarely resemble the futures they imagine. This gap between intention and reality underscores the complexity of the political world. Assassination is never just a matter of one person killing another. It is a collision between personal conviction and the vast, unpredictable machinery of history. If there is one lesson that emerges again and again from examining assassinations across centuries, it is that violence rarely produces the change its perpetrators seek. Instead, it often ignites forces that spiral beyond their control. The senators who killed Julius Caesar hoped to restore the Republic, but instead unleashed civil war. Gavrilo Princip aimed to advance South Slav nationalism, but inadvertently ignited the First World War. The extremists who killed Yitzhak Rabin believed they were saving their nation, yet they plunged the peace process into uncertainty. These examples reveal that assassins often misunderstand the political dynamics of their time. They act under the illusion that one individual's removal will reshape society in a clear and predictable way. But societies are far more complex than that. Assassination removes a leader, but it cannot remove the forces that create conflict, inequality, or ideological opposition. At the same time, assassinations expose the fragile nature of political leadership. Leaders occupy symbolic as well as practical roles. They embody the aspirations of their supporters, the fears of their opponents, and the narratives that hold societies together. When a leader is removed through violence, society must confront not only the loss of that individual, but the fragility of the structures that depend on them. Assassination challenges the assumption that political life is governed by rules, institutions, and shared principles. It reveals the vulnerability of these systems to disruption, demonstrating that no matter how strong a state appears, its stability still relies on human decisions, loyalties, and relationships. Assassination also teaches us about the limits of power. Even the most powerful leaders are vulnerable. History is filled with examples of kings, presidents, prime ministers, generals, activists, and revolutionaries who believed in their own invincibility. Their deaths remind us that no amount of rank, wealth, or influence can protect a person completely from political violence. This vulnerability is part of what makes assassination such a charged and symbolic act. It destroys the illusion of power as an impenetrable shield. It reminds societies that their leaders are human and mortal, and that the structures built around them may not be as stable as they appear. Another profound lesson from the study of assassination is the enduring importance of political institutions. When institutions are strong, the death of a leader, even a significant one, does not destabilize the nation. Succession plans, legal frameworks, and public confidence in governance allow the system to absorb shocks. When institutions are weak, however, the death of a leader can unleash chaos. The difference between these two outcomes reveals the essential role institutions play in maintaining stability. It is not the leader alone who secures a nation's future, but the strength and resilience of the structures around them. This is why assassinations in democracies tend to have limited long-term impact, while those in unstable or transitional societies often reshape history. Still, it would be a mistake to conclude that assassinations are purely political events. They are also deeply emotional ones. When a leader is killed, the public does not respond simply with political calculations. People grieve. They feel anger, fear, confusion, and uncertainty. This emotional response shapes the political consequences as much as institutional or ideological factors. The grief following the assassinations of Abraham Lincoln, Mahatma Gandhi, John F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King Jr. created powerful movements for unity and reform. Conversely, the fear following assassinations, such as those of Anwar Sadat or Indira Gandhi, contributed to political crackdowns and heightened authoritarianism. The emotional atmosphere around an assassination influences whether a society moves toward reconciliation or division. This emotional dimension helps explain why assassination often becomes intertwined with myth. Societies rarely remember assassinated leaders purely for who they were in life. Instead, their deaths become symbolic turning points, and their legacies are reshaped by collective memory. They are transformed into martyrs, heroes, or cautionary figures. The myth-making process simplifies complex lives into clear moral lessons, yet this simplification can be dangerous. When society turns a leader into a myth, it may overlook the deeper issues that led to their death or misunderstand the forces at work. Myth-making can also become a political tool used to justify policies or condemn opponents. Nevertheless, myths serve an important purpose. They help societies cope with tragedy, find meaning in loss, and articulate values in times of crisis. They also inspire future generations. The stories of leaders like Gandhi, Lincoln, and King continue to motivate movements for justice, equality, and freedom long after their deaths. This demonstrates another paradox. Assassination can sometimes expand a leader's influence rather than diminish it. Death frees an idea from the limitations of the individual who embodied it, allowing it to grow beyond the constraints of politics or circumstance. Yet the reality remains that assassination is a tragedy not only for individuals and their families, but for societies as a whole. It deprives nations of leaders who might have guided them toward peace, unity, or reform. It disrupts the continuity of political development and introduces uncertainty into the fabric of governance. It erodes trust in institutions and deepens existing divisions, and it perpetuates the belief that violence is an acceptable method for resolving political disagreement. For these reasons, assassination must be understood not simply as a historical phenomenon, but as a warning. It reminds us of the fragility of peace, the dangers of extremism, and the importance of building systems that can withstand shocks without descending into chaos. As we conclude this examination of history's most influential assassinations, we should reflect on what these events collectively reveal about the human condition. They show us how deeply people yearn to shape the future, sometimes with tragic consequences. They show us the perils of absolutism, the risks of polarization, and the destructive potential of unchecked ideology. They show us that the quest for power, whether to preserve or transform society, can lead individuals to commit acts that reverberate far beyond their intentions. And they show us that the path of violence, though it may seem decisive in the moment, rarely produces lasting solutions. But perhaps above all, these stories reveal our capacity for resilience. Again and again, societies confronted with political assassination have found ways to rebuild, to continue, and to imagine new futures. They have mourned their losses, confronted their divisions, and worked to overcome the instability that assassination produces. This resilience is not guaranteed. It requires vigilance, political maturity, and a willingness to learn from history rather than repeat its mistakes. The study of assassination is therefore not merely a recounting of violence, it is an exploration of the choices societies make in response to violence. In understanding the weight of these events, we also recognize the responsibility that modern societies carry. Political violence thrives in environments of hatred, division, misinformation, and unchecked extremism. Preventing future assassinations means fostering dialogue, strengthening institutions, and promoting the values that allow people with different beliefs to coexist without resorting to violence. It means recognizing the humanity in our political opponents and resisting the temptation to view politics as a zero-sum struggle. It means remembering that the consequences of assassination extend far beyond the moment of the act, shaping the lives of millions and altering the course of history. And with that, we bring this long exploration to a close. These chapters have traced the arc of political assassination across centuries, continents, and cultures. They have examined not only the events themselves, but the structures, motivations, and meanings that surround them. The stories of these assassinations are not isolated tragedies. They are reflections of human ambition, conflict, and vulnerability. They are reminders of the power individuals hold and the responsibility that comes with that power. They are cautionary tales about the dangers of extremism and the fragility of peace. And they are, ultimately, windows into the enduring struggle to shape a just and stable world. Thank you for taking this full journey through history's most influential assassinations. If you enjoyed this documentary-style narrative and want more deep explorations like this, you are always welcome to subscribe and like so you don't miss future episodes and long-form historical documentaries.